Hi, Bob Gower at BobCanHelp.com, and I want to share with you today what I think is one of the most important and often most overlooked pieces of innovation and performance within companies. Now, I've worked with a lot of companies. I've worked with people from everything from Fortune 100 down to small startups as a product manager, as an agile coach, and many people come to me. They come to me with problems around predictability, around quality, and also around innovation. Like, how do we make better products? How do we make them more predictably? How do we make them faster? And after working with several organizations on their development process, I've come across a key piece that I think is what's missing from many organizations. And many people, even when they're doing agile transitions, often overlook this most important piece. And the most important piece is that it's important that we organize our teams and we organize our businesses around small teams. And this is what works with the way our minds work. It's what works with the way we work as people. Let me explain a little bit about this. So the first thing I want to talk about is typically compensation schemes within organizations. Now, Dan Pink has done some amazing work on this, on popularizing this and some of the studies around this. But often what we think of is, let's reward the behavior that we want, and let's punish the behavior that we don't want, or at least not reward that behavior. And what we're finding more and more is that that's fine as long as we're talking about mechanical tasks. But as soon as we start requiring or asking people to have even more than sort of rudimentary cognitive ability, that these ideas of carrots and of course sticks don't work anymore and actually will produce even worse results. And what Dan Pink says about this, and I highly recommend Dan's book Drive if you haven't seen it, but what Dan says about this, he says, rewards can send performance, creativity, and even upstanding behavior toppling like dominoes. And what they found is that rewarding creative performance. Now this is not saying you don't need to pay your people, but what it says is that you need to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table. And once you've done that, you need to find other ways to motivate them. Now, what's interesting about this research is that they have found a few things that motivate people. They've actually found 3 things. Now, I recommend you, again, refer to Dan's work if you want to find out what all 3 are, but I'm only going to talk about one today. And that one is autonomy. That we as people want to be self-directed. We want to have a sense of autonomy about how we spend our time, how we do our tasks, and even often what tasks we do. So sort of time, task, methodology, all of these things we'd like to have some degree of self-direction over. And if we don't have that self-direction, it can be terribly demotivating and can kill creativity and it can kill productivity within an organization. So the first thing I want you to think about, I want you to bookmark this in your mind and think autonomy. How can I provide more autonomy to my people? Now the next piece is, and this is a lovely sort of illustration of some children playing in the Osani tribe. I believe this is in North Africa. But it sort of illustrates a point that we as people like to be together. And in fact, there have been the sort of very heartbreaking studies have been done around children and babies in particular who are given all the nourishment they might need except attention. And in some cases, this can actually cause the death of some of these infants. So we as people, or we as a species, are actually what's called hypersocial. And what that means is that we like to be together and that we work best when we're together. And for the vast majority of our evolution, this happened in fairly small groups of people, say 100 to 150 people we spent most of our lives with for the vast majority of our social evolution. That's not to say that we have to keep our companies that size, but it has to say that it does speak to how big a group that we can handle. But the thing I want you to bookmark is that we like working together. So we like autonomy and we like working together. And in some ways, these could be seen as separate or as opposing, right? How do I achieve autonomy while also working with other people? And I think this is one of the key challenges of the modern manager. But there's one more key challenge that I want to highlight here, and that is that we are cognitively limited as human beings. In other words, our brains can only handle so much information and can only handle so much communication. Now let's see how this breaks down. So I have up here an equation, which is n times n minus 1 divided by 2. And what that is, if you replace n with the number of people in a group, and you do this equation, that will give you the number of lines of communication within that group. And what this means is each line of communication is an opportunity for understanding. It's also an opportunity for misunderstanding, and it's also an opportunity for overload should there be too many lines of communication. We all know what it's like to sit and do email and watch TV or drive the car while we talk on the phone. All of these things, right? Our minds are actually limited in the amount of information that they can take in at any given time. So how does this break down? So if we have a group of 6 people, we're going to have 15 open lines of communication. But if we have a group of 12 people, we just double that. We almost, quadruple the open lines of communication, right? We more than quadruple the open lines of communication by doubling the size of the group. So what we find is that in an agile system or a teamwork, one of the sort of the optimal size is right about there in the middle, somewhere between, say, somewhere around 8 people, 8 or 9 tends to be where we begin to max out in terms of how many conversations that we can track in a comfortable way in our cognitive limitation, right? So what does this do, right? So what I'm talking about is I'm talking about simplicity. So what do we do if we take these 3 things together? We have autonomy, that we like to be self-directed. We have working together, that we like to work with other people, and that we want to keep things simple. We want to keep things very, very simple in terms of how many open lines of communication we have. What this means is that the ideal way to organize our organization is around small groups of people, small, interdependent, and autonomous groups of people, what we call self-organizing and sometimes self-directing and even self-managing teams. Teams of people that can produce value, that are cross-functional, so they can actually produce value for other people all by themselves. So I'm not talking about, like the sort of typical way of breaking things up in a project where you have the architecture team, the design team, and so forth. But really these cross-functional teams where you have architecture, design, coding, and production all in one team, meaning that they can then produce value that they can stitch together into a larger project. And what does this look like? A lot of organizations organize themselves like this, which is sort of chaotic. They think of, what's the skill that I need and how can I plug it into each project? How can I plug this person in over here and over here and over here? And you might see that there's a spreadsheet that has all these names on it, has their capabilities, and then has the projects and their needs on it, and then has their capabilities, and then we kind of match the two. Sometimes partially, actually not even sometimes, often partially allocating a person to multiple projects. And what we find is that this begins to erode the way we work, because we're working on so many projects, there's so many open lines of communication. So what we find is more effective is if we begin to organize more like this. So let's have some teams and let's have some teamwork. This is a far more disciplined approach than most organizations are used to doing, but it's actually far easier because once you organize those teams, you can begin to organize your business so those teams are successful and you can serve. You can actually create management cultures that serve these teams. So this is the point, and I think this is a very important point, is that if we are to produce the kinds of products and the kinds of companies that we want to produce, we're going to begin to need to change the way we actually think about our companies and think about our work. And if we do, I believe that we're going to make better products, we're going to make better organizations, we're going to make happier people. And really what we're going to be able to do is make the world a little bit better of a place. And to me, that's what this work is all about. So thanks very much for your attention. My name again, Bob Gower of bobcanhelp.com. I am also an Agile coach with Rally Software. And I look forward to your comments and to your questions. Thank you so much.